this whole COVID also has made me think about, you know, what is a safe place to be. Like I feel Bangalore is a very, or Bengaluru, is one of the safer places, and I felt very safe being here during the whole pandemic experience. But it still makes one think, like, I feel like social media is much more unsafe than Bangalore, for example, as a place to spend too much time on. And I wanted to kick off this discussion with the panelists by just sharing a small thought, which is just recently I was taking a walk. I mean, I do step out of the house, put on my clothes, and try to walk because I like Bangalore. It's the possibilities of taking walks and all. So I was walking in North Bangalore. There's a small lake called Sankey Tank. Some of you may know that area. So I was walking on that bund type of road, embankment road, that passes the lake, and um, and there was a car that slowed down a little ahead of me, and a man got out with 2 bags of plastic bags, which is already a crime, and they were full of garbage, like also mixed garbage, like wet and dry, like COVID masks and banana peels and that kind of thing. And then I saw him he threw one of the bags into the Sankey tank. Then I kind of rushed up and told him that this is not really good for environment. And before he threw the second bag. But because I advised him in English, he started shouting at me, you outsider, foreign hand, Pakistani, COVID patient, go away. This is why I'm wearing this thing to prevent incident from being repeated. So he started abusing me and telling me to go home. And I'm like, there's no flights home. Anyway, I live nearby, so I can walk home if you want. And then I kind of understood that the problem was not really, it was because I spoke to him in English, and it would seem that I was not in my own home. And he was saying that he's affiliated to the ruling party and he can do whatever he likes. If he wants to throw garbage in Sankey tank, including COVID mask, he will do so. And I should not talk, mention it. So I was just thinking to myself, what does it mean to be a permanent resident? What does it mean to live in a city? Like, as people who live in Bangalore, are we allowed to do anything to the city, like throw garbage in the lakes? Or should we, respect the city? Is it the city that owns us, or do we own the city, basically? I started thinking. And so with this thought, I would like the panelists to each respond to this thing and, help me clear my mind on this matter a little bit. So, shall we? Who wants to start?
I can start.
Okay.
So, this subject of this talk was permanent address. So, before we come to home, when you think of address, it's a box that you fill in application forms for, say, your ration card or job application or for a visa or passport. So all it tells you is that you can be traced there and you actually live in a place in which you have legal rights. So when you think of home, it brings another dimension altogether, which is more emotional, which is a sense of a security, comfort, belonging, rootedness, all of that. Therefore, and when you think of a permanent home, you are thinking of, again, a place where you cannot be evicted, or you are, you belong so completely that you fear no, sense of not being able to go back there. So these are my first thoughts about address, home, and permanent home. Perhaps.
Actually, you mentioned forms and legality. I must share this incident much before COVID, in our pre-COVID lives. When I was traveling, I had to fill up a visa form, and in that particular form, there were two boxes. One which said nationality, present, and the other which said nationality, original. And that gave me pause for a minute because I mean, for me, my nationality has always been Indian. So I thought, oh, well, so there is nothing permanent about this. You know, the whole idea of impermanence is built into the way even governments perceive life and how their citizens or how their people are going to live. So officially, they seem to have understood that there is nothing permanent about where you're going to live and where you belong. You know, that's something that can change, and we can travel uh, with our homes on our backs like snails. So the whole question of what is home that you were talking about. So home is uh, in relation to my writing, in my books, particularly in my last one, Boys from Good Families. So home is a place of comfort. It is entry into the world. You know, it is the place where you define the other, the outside world. That's the outside, and this is my home. And your first ideas about the world, about who you are, your sense of self, what is right and what is not right, that is where you receive it. And what happens to my character and what happens to all of us is, I think, as your journey into adulthood, into selfhood begins, as you start growing, you also have to leave this home, this bubble of received wisdom, of comfort, of values that you receive from your family, from your community, and also the support that you receive from there. You, if you have to, the unexamined life, you want to examine your life, that is where you have to begin. You have to be ready to leave home, to venture out. And that is also the subject of my books. Maybe we can talk about that later.
Exactly. I'll come back to that. Aruna?
Yeah, so I would echo a lot of what they were saying. So to me, home is a place of belonging, a place where you're familiar with the customs and rituals and the landscape of the place, whether it's a city or a nation or your house. And it's a place where you're accepted for what you are and where you accept that place for what it is, whether it is perfect or imperfect. And it's also a place where you have a sense of identity. So I, like most urban Indians, I grew up in Bombay, which in itself is an amalgamation of cultures and people coming from different cities. And then when I moved to Bangalore, I did feel like an outsider for a while. So the first time I felt at home is when I was watching a RCB and Mumbai Indians match. And I, without thinking, I started cheering for RCB. So then I felt like a Bangalorean. And today, if I feel like a Bangalorean, it's because, I'm privy to the inside jokes. So if Danish Seth makes a joke about Ram Murthy Aure or Jaya, I immediately recognize those characters. So I'm familiar with the culture of the place. So that is home to me. And you were talking also about, feeling a little at odds with the place and whether you feel like an outsider. So I think Robert Frost had an interesting thing to say. He said, home is the place when you have to go there, they have to take you in. So it's not a perfect place, and you may not be perfect, but there is a sense of belonging. There's no, it's an unconditional belonging.
Right.
So as long as you feel that, I think that is home.
I also want to clarify that, don't misunderstand my anecdote. It's like I mention it more because it was something out of the ordinary. Like generally, I feel very safe and happy here, and I mean, all the local people are always so helpful, and you know, whenever there's anything, they want to reach out and help, which would not happen in many other cities. Like through my life, I've lived in, you know, Shanghai and Athens and many other countries, and Bangalore has always felt like the most homely city, where like your next door neighbor is always prepared to help you, to take care of you. It's whether it be small things. Like, I mean, if I've fallen ill, my landlord's wife has been cooking idlis and sending it, you know, like that kind of thing, no? Which I don't think would happen probably anywhere else in the world. It's only, you know, it's a very
Zach, one
Karnataka thing.
interruption,
Sorry.
about this anecdote that, you know, it's not specific to you, because if any of us stopped someone from doing something uncivil, you know, not civic minded or whatever, their first reaction is this your city?
Right, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is your father's city. I can do what I want here because this is my city.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Yes.
Thank you.
Opportunity.
It comforts me a lot, this thought. And I think there's something very special about Bangalore in the sense that compared to many other cities, like if you go to, like I mentioned, I've lived in Shanghai, like they're all Chinese there, too many Chinese. And like if you go to Athens and live there, there's too many Greeks there, no? Like in Bangalore, you know, there's all kinds of people, large population of Kannadigas, but there will also be people from Andhra, Telugu speakers, Tamils, Malayali speakers, North Indians even. I don't know what North Indians are doing here, but they can also be here, I think, and foreigners like me. So, and somebody once told me that, like, if you meet any regular person in the street in Bangalore, it's the only city where that regular person will be fluent in 4 to 5 languages. They'll know Kannada, they'll know English, they'll know Hindi, they'll know some Telugu or Tamil or some other language. I mean, probably there's no other city in the world which is so multilingual as compared to Bangalore. But I wanted to come back to something that Usha, you said about this, like how we define our home by going outside, or, you know, from the outside. It made me think of, like, for example, say Mahatma Gandhi, like when he was a young man, he wanted to, you know, go to England. He had a desperate dream to take that law exam in England and become a barrister and all, which he did. And while in England, he was trying to become an Englishman. He was wearing suit and tie, not like dhoti and anything. He was learning how to dance Western dances, and he was trying to learn how to speak French. And once I remember talking to a famous psychologist called Sudhir Kakar, and he pointed out to me that Gandhi actually discovered how Indian he was through the process of living for 3 years in London as a teenager. I mean, in his late teens. We went there when he was 17, I think. And that made him able to appreciate India as his home country, and, you know, discover India, as it were. So what do you guys say to that?
Absolutely. You see that in diasporic Indians everywhere. You know, they are not as Indian here as they are over there in terms of, you know, whether it's celebrating festivals or whether it is defending their culture against something that they totally agree with, but they don't like any attack from outside. So you see that, isn't it?
In many ways, they seem to become more Indian than Indians themselves. But
in fact, I often say that they look as if they're dressed from a costume cover, because they live in a time warp, what India, you know, was to them.
Right.
It is so.
But I think also as individuals, there's a time in our life, maybe when we become in our late teens, early 20s, when family ties become the ties that bind and gag and become oppressive, and then home for us may represent freedom and independence. So our first home outside our primary home, which is the parental home, perhaps, that could be like it could be a hostel room, or a flat that you share with colleagues,
Right.
but that represents freedom and independence and your first sense of individuality and self. So that becomes your home. But at the same time, when you once you live in that home away from home, you start appreciating the parental home and your roots much more. So I think, being away from home gives you a greater appreciation as well.
Yeah.
One thing that you said about Bangalore, and also otherwise, and more so because I think it's also possible to, the whole point of growing up is experiencing other cultures. It could be, you could stay in your own home or your city, but then you could, the sensory experience, you could travel to other places, you could see. Now it's so much more possible because of the internet and so many programs that we have. And then the smells, language, music, and food. You can travel and grow. And again, literature, art. There are so many different ways of experiencing other cultures and setting off, or rather looking at your culture from another point of view. And also growing as composite individuals, because this is what finally we, I think that is what maybe literature, art, and that is what growing up and becoming adult and becoming yourself is. And maybe when we write and we read, that is the journey that we are making, expanding ourselves in ways that we may not be aware of ourselves.
Okay, so let's continue a little bit on this line, but tweak it a little bit. So, Aruna, I think in your debut novel, you sort of juxtaposed certain permanence in the form of an ancestral home versus like when you move to city and you become like a nuclear family instead of joint family, and then returning to ancestral home, and that whole, movement between the permanent and the sort of, I suppose nuclear family, you mean you live in a rented apartment and it's not actually going to be there for the next generation maybe, and things. So like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so in my first novel, Mango Cheeks Metal Teeth, I set it against the backdrop of something I always wanted to write about, which is the summer vacation in the ancestral home. Because as children, that was a very typical experience that we had growing up in the 70s and 80s. Because our parents' generation were the first to collectively move out of the hometown in search of better opportunities and work and so on. So their families, their brothers and sisters were all dispersed over many cities and maybe many countries as well. So the family unit was actually dispersed. It was just the grandparents staying in the ancestral home in the hometown. So for us as children, for most of the year, we were these bland urban children, leading these monitored lives and living in these small flats in nuclear family units. And that was our identity. But come the summer vacation, we would go back to the grandparents' home, which was usually this huge home because they were large families. So it would be this big home with backyards and gardens and ghosts, rumored ghosts, and cobwebs and dark rooms and all of that.
But no COVID.
No COVID. Yeah. So, for us as children, when we went back to that, we became part of a different identity, part of this larger family and this grander house. And, we also, our personalities changed a little bit during the summer. And we went from being these bland urban kids, we became these adventurous little things who were mucking about in the backyard and would never come into the house except for meals. And, generally up to no good. So it was a different sense of self that we discovered. And if today I feel a tug when I go back to my hometown, which is Kerala, where I've never lived, it is because of those short, 1 month, 2 months that we spent in the ancestral home. So that was an experience I think this generation may not have in the same way. So it was something I wanted to capture, and that's what I've written about in Mango Cheeks Method Tea.
Yeah. So Usha, you just heard what she said, Aruna said. In your latest novel, you have one of the characters that say, I'm quoting here, I thought your house was going to be a place to park your soul in. Like the home is like almost like a sort of spiritual, permanent, heavenly abode or something like that. Like, I mean, tell me what this means.
Actually, the protagonist of this novel lived lived all his life in a flat, and he had no cause to complain about his life there. He had never given it any thought that whether this is home or not, whatever, till something pushed him to thinking that maybe this is not the place for me to live in. And so when he thinks of a home, he thinks of a house. He doesn't think of moving to another place, which is either a flat or he thinks of not just a house, but of owning the house. And so then we come to this whole business of a permanent home having this component of ownership and property, all that kind of thing is also inextricably, even Aruna's, home place where she went back each time was owned by somebody, and somebody that was her family. It was a family home. So that part of, that aspect is what this novel explores too. The fact that in a house which belongs to you, because it's yours, you have the right of, you have freedom of choice, the way you want to live or render it or whatever. So basically it's about building a house and house as home. So that's
Yeah.
May I take up on that?
Exactly.
So what Usha said, what you said, there is this distinction between house and home, and feeling at home and owning a house and living in a house. And in my latest novel, that is Boys from Good Families. So this is this boy who comes from a good family, an established family, which owns an ancestral home. And he's very well settled, and he lives in this cocoon. He belongs to the upper crust of society, and he accepts everything that comes to him unthinkingly. And the first time he something happens to him that is outside this little cocoon. He falls in love with an unsuitable girl. She lives in the outhouse in the compound of his large home. And for the first time, when he finds that there is something that is not dictated by his family, by his tradition, he wants to discover or explore the joy of this new feeling. This is something surprising that's happened to him. His family comes down very hard on this new feeling, and he realizes that as long as he plays by the rules, this comfort, this feeling of home is guaranteed to him. So even though he lives in this large house, he's no longer at home there. And that is when he starts thinking of moving out. He goes to the US to study and to make a life for himself. And when he is there, finally, it is the house that calls him back. So when he was living in this house in the 80s, when it was home, it was a kind of a white elephant, shabby. Yes, it's a symbol of privilege, but it was a little irritating. It needed a lot of repairs. But when he comes back in 2005, he finds that this house, this home has been transformed into a piece of prime real estate. And it's, good enough. We are right plumb in the IT, when the IT wave has taken over the city. And his house, where it is located, it's good enough or valuable enough to kill for. So he comes, the whole circle where his house was a home and then it was not a home, and then he comes back, he realizes that it's worth a lot of money. So that's the cycle it goes through.
So there is this aspect of home as also not just spelling security and comfort, but it can also be a threatening place for
Yes.
many.
What do you
Right.
mean? Elaborate on that a little bit.
Threatening.
Yeah, what do you
It
mean?
can be a place where you're not happy. Where I mean,
Right.
we have been thinking of home and all that as a place where you're essentially happy and safe and all that. But there are lots of people who are there who are even threatened in their own homes.
Yes.
It could be abuse. It could be anything. It could be a claustrophobia.
Yes, right.
So
Yeah.
So, Usha, number 1, number 2, like, I mean,
Usha's and Aruna.
Central Usha, what you just said previously,
Yeah.
but you just said previously, like, it made me think of, Lord Buddha, like what they say. I mean, this whole thing, like, when he was 29 or something, he stepped out of his home for the first time and he encountered, illness, poverty, starving, something like that. And then after that, he could not be comfortable at home anymore. And for the rest of his life, he was traveling. Like, I visited many of the places where he lived. He would live in some cave in Bihar for, during the rainy season. Then he would, of course, be, in Varanasi preaching at sometimes and all. And then when he was turning 80, he felt that, I'll go back home to Lumbini. He was born in Lumbini in Nepal. But on the way, unfortunately, he ate some devotees offered him a meal of, I think, pork, and he felt didn't taste good. So he told all his devotees that don't touch this pork, I'll eat it all myself. And then he got food poisoning and died in near Gorakhpur in UP. So, like, and what you described sounds a bit like this. So, like, as authors, like, this, if we use home to tell a story, like the story of Buddha or a story like you just told, like, how does home and absence of home and maybe that threatening home, I mean, how does it lend it to, like, fictional uses? For you as authors, like, does it stimulate, what kind of ideas has it stimulated for you?
I have not actually thought of home in isolation in a plot as much as it's just woven into a plot where it becomes a setting.
Yeah.
And
It's the backdrop.
For me, in my work, the city of Bangalore, the environs of Bangalore, that is the setting, and it's very organic to my novels, because the changes that have taken place in this city, its history, the trajectory of its history, and the way it has changed, that reflects or it does affect the characters. So the plot, the development of characters, the events that take place are very much influenced by the changes in the city. My last novel, Monkey Man, is set in 2000, where the changes that when Bangalore changed from, say, the pensioners' paradise to Silicon Valley, the complete change in, say, the amenities, the infrastructure, the attitude of people, that is reflected in the novel. And in fact, there's a strange creature that appears on the horizon. And what I was trying to think of is whether, when a city changes very fast, there are so many changes that take place in your life, which pull you out of your comfort zone, over which you have no control. You can see that it is happening, it is passing you by, and you feel that you are kind of losing out in the race. And whereas some others feel that no, it's a good thing. It's a city of opportunity. I am able to come up trumps in this. So what happens? Is it a kind of an act of wish fulfillment that some kind of ghostly creature, a mutant form, suddenly appears? That was the kind of teaser there. And it connected with, there was a time when, if you all remember, there was a beastly creature that was spotted all over India, in fact. And people kept saying, oh, it's appearing here and it's appearing there. And then it disappeared. So there was a time when, so that set me thinking about whether cities, whether people, they kind of throw out their anxieties and into some kind of mutant form which plagues them or which takes over the collective imagination of the people.
I've always thought of you as a very rooted author, and like listening to you sort of confirms that thought. I always thought of myself as a very uprooted author. What about Aruna and Usha? I won't call you right-wing Usha, although you sit to the right of central Usha.
So I'm centrist.
Yeah, I mean,
No, I would say I'm not a rooted writer.
Not a rooted.
I mean, not rooted in a specific culture, because in fact, the last book I wrote was deploring the fact that the city did not change.
Right.
And and then I like the idea of not having to culturally associate yourself with one place or the other. And home is wherever you think that it's not just comfort, but this is hard to say, where I think even where you can think and you're stimulated, perhaps.
Okay. Aruna?
I would call myself, yes, rooted.
Rooted.
Both my books have a very strong family flavor to it. Both Mango Cheeks, Metal Teeth, and The Monster Still Lurk. And to me, family is love and unconditional support and laughter, but it's also bitter arguments and long-standing feuds and undercurrents. So all that conflict shows. I don't think families and homes are perfect places. So conflicts happen, and that is portrayed in my book. But I also feel home in certain cases, like in Monster Still Lurk. The protagonist's mother at some point is very ill, and he stays in his office for as long as he can and lets his wife deal with it, because he can't deal with the emotion of seeing her ailing. So yes, the home can be a place of sorrow and conflict and all of that. For me, I wouldn't, I write humor and satire, so I wouldn't say I delve very deeply into the conflict, but it is definitely reflected, because I think that's what families are about. And for me, family is mostly about all the oddball characters. The father who will not remember your birthday, but who will remember how much a bus ticket cost in 1968. Or, the sister who suddenly found religion and will bore you to death with sermons. Or the dog who's scared of his own shadow, or the maid who's a raging hypochondriac. To me, all this is what makes family and home for me, and that's what reflects in my writing.
Okay, let's pursue this thought a little further. Like, I personally, this idea of, conflict with your home, or that thing, like, for example, when I wrote my first book, I just sort of gave up my home and got rid of everything I owned. And I just had one backpack and a typewriter. This was before computers. There was a thing called typewriter, which click, click, click. So I had a backpack and a typewriter, and I moved around between different hotel rooms for 2 years as I was writing the book, and without any home. So, like, because I needed to get away from home. So, like, suppose, like, you really have conflicting emotions about home, like you were hinting at similar ideas just now, and you.
I think in a way, you can have a home but be homeless in that sense. If you don't kind of identify with the values of that home, you can feel, you no longer feel part of that home, whether it's a nation or a city or your house and your family. So somebody staying on the footpath may feel more at home with his slice of footpath than somebody who has a huge mansion but does not feel at home.
Actually,
So,
argues the point that not all of us want a home as such. Many people who are nomads by nature, who have wanderlust and don't really want to be, stuck in a place. So there are those kind of people who feel quite at home not being at home.
So home may be a state of mind, where you're happiest when you're wandering. You don't want to be tied down to a place. And as you said, that you may be in conflict, you may have the biggest home, the most gorgeous settings and every comfort on earth, but you may that may not be home. You may still be chafing. There may be something about it which makes you want to get out, or you feel that it's okay, I can be at home anywhere, so long as my mind is at rest, or my mind is stimulated, or I can live life on my own terms.
So you're talking about not just home, but the trappings of home, whether it's family or the environment that's created, all that. So
Yeah.
it might just be not for you.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to worry about me. I have a home now. I'm
And
fine now.
people change, the concept of home also changes over your lifetime. As you were saying, as when you are very young, home is your family, your people, and then as you start growing up, there is that rebellious phase where you rebel against everything. You're a rebel without a cause, so to say. But and it's easiest to rebel at the most familiar thing, and hit out against that. And then you start traveling, and maybe you come to a new idea of what home is, and that could well be that there is no such thing as a permanent home.
Yeah.
Actually, in The Monsters Still Lurk, I follow a typical middle-class family over 25 years, 3 generations of that family. So in a way, it's the life cycle of a typical middle-class person that I'm tracing. So it also traces one's typical middle-class notion of what is home and how it changes over the years. So initially, it may be your parental home, then it may be your first bachelor home, then it may be the home that you create with your partner, and that is where perhaps you see your future being built. And finally, in a circle of life kind of way, your parents may come to live with you, and at the end of your life, you may go and live with your children, and your children's home becomes your home. So that is the kind of thing I trace in The Monsters Still Lurk.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah. So my wanderings sort of ended when I found R.K. Narayan and his books, and I started reading about Malgudi. And I thought, okay, I want to settle down in Karnataka. I mean, some people say Malgudi is in Tamil Nadu because he was a Tamilian, but it was actually in Karnataka. If you look at Malgudi Days, that TV serial, you'll see the postal code is for Agumbe in Malnad. So I somehow, through fiction, I felt that, I belong here. Through reading Indian authors, and I got a feeling that I want to just stay here and stop traveling around with my backpack. So for you guys, if you think of fiction as a home, can you actually find a home through, I mean, is there any book you've read where you felt that in your life that this sort of settles the issue, this is home, I belong in this writer's school of thought, or I'm thinking not necessarily as a physical space, but more like a home in a maybe a literary tradition. Like, which would that author be? Which would that book or poet or text be that in your lives have sort of made you kind of settle down? This is what I want to write. This is the kind of author I want to be. This is the kind of life I want to live. This is my home.
That's a difficult one.
Yes, that's really
Yeah, that would require some.
I'm so glad I stunned you.
Yeah, you stumped us.
right.
All I can say is if I had to write about something, I would want to write about something I'm familiar with. So I haven't read anything that I could say that I could confidently go there and be able to write about that place convincingly. So maybe that settled it for me.
So just like you had Malgudi, I had Enid Blyton when I was growing up, and for me, though I had never been to England, and I always wanted to know what potted meat sandwiches were and what ginger ale was, and all. So that felt like a sort of fictional home for me because we grew up reading Enid Blyton. So I still don't know what potted meat sandwiches are, though.
Right, I know. Enid Blyton was something that we all read, and potatoes in their jackets.
Yeah,
I remember
right.
that too. And then later I realized it was just boiled potatoes, maybe, with the skin still intact.
I think maybe baked potatoes.
Baked.
Yeah, not boiled, but almost the same.
Possibly. See, it's still something that we can debate. And now, of course, Enid Blyton is out of fashion. As many people would say, no, we have plenty of Indian writers writing children's fiction, and that is what everybody is reading. So now that, there are, because of various reasons, I mean, I write in English, most of my reading was in the English language because of our education system. And I must say that the works of Jane Austen, the social concerns that she has, her humor, the nuanced writing was what attracted me. And the fact that the issues are understated, and the reading is so enjoyable, the experience is so enjoyable, and it also provided you with the opportunity to savor something privately in your own space. It was not in your face. So that was something that her novel of manners. It is something that interested me in my writing, and her style also. So I would say that. But at the same time, the oral tradition, the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, something that I grew up listening to, that was also an influence. So I would say these were the various literary influences that made me feel at home. Yes, R.K. Narayan too. And as you start reading more, there are more and more books. There are other things that influence you. But I found that something that is nuanced, that is understated, which is not in your face, where the ideology is not worn on the sleeve, the author does not wear his or her ideology on her sleeve, is something that I gravitated towards. For instance, there is this book. Right now, the world is torn by war. There are so many memoirs or descriptions of the war. And there is this book by Hassan Dawood. He's a Lebanese writer. It's called Penguin's Song, if I remember correctly. It is about the war in Lebanon and how Beirut was torn. But there's very little, the war doesn't come into the picture at all. It's about this family which is kind of living on the outskirts. And this young man who is deformed, he's called the penguin because of the way he looks. And he watches the city receding and changes taking place from his window. And he has a very active imagination, which is not, it's quite clear that it doesn't quite mirror what is happening. But this was a book which I found very compelling. And it came at the war from a completely different direction. So if one has to think of all that one has read and all the books that have influenced you, I would say it's a mode of narration. It's a mode of evoking the world that has interested you.
Okay, thank you so much, and all three of you, and thank you all in the audience for being so brave.